Hey guys, welcome to Storytime with Jester. Today I'm going to be continuing the saga of Book of Prophecies. Pick up where we left off last week at chapter 39. The man stood looking in a mirror. It was 5 feet in height and intricately carved to resemble 2 giant serpents facing away from the mirror and serving the function of holding the mirror in place. What the man saw in the mirror was not his own reflection, but an alien jungle. Alien to most, but not to this man. He had been there before. A grueling 2-year expedition where he was one of few that made it back alive, and then a return trip to the location depicted in the mirror almost a year later. He teleported a throne and several tapestries his party had discovered to the room he was currently standing in, setting up a throne room of sorts. When he found this mirror recently, he knew it would go perfectly here. The mirror focused now on a small clearing where an altar of bones was the centerpiece. Surrounding the altar was 6 reptilian creatures that had the torso and arms of a human and the head and tail of a snake. They wielded longswords whose hilts were adorned with small rubies. A 7th, whose scales were of a different color pattern than the others, being bright blue and silver instead of green and brown, and whose head and arms were human, carried a staff in the shape of a serpent and had a scimitar dangling from a leather thong on its waist. The man spoke a word in an alien tongue, almost snake-like in its sound, and instantly his body transformed. His skin turned to scales, his arms disappeared, his legs morphed into a tail, and his head became that of a serpent. He slithered out of the clothes he was wearing and into the mirror, appearing in the scene depicted. The creatures who had been chanting the name of their snake god, upon his sudden appearance in their midst, bowed before him. "The time that I foretold is at hand," the man-snake said in the alien tongue. The 7 creatures followed their god back through the gate that was the mirror into the throne room. There the god slithered back into the clothes and transformed himself back into the man. With a wave of his hand, the scene shifted in the mirror. Instead of a jungle, the mirror showed a swamp. "Your new home," he said, motioning to the mirror. "You may hunt to the east. The west and south are forbidden to you. You alone of your people have I deemed worthy of this. Go now with my blessing." The 7 creatures entered the mirror and into the swamp. With another wave of his hand, the image of the swamp disappeared. The man approached the mirror, staring at his own reflection. His snake-like eyes studied his appearance for several moments before he activated the magic on a ring he wore. Suddenly his appearance changed to that of an old wizard with a brown, pointed floppy hat and red band, tan robes, and a dark blue cloak. "Andor and the others will be waiting for me," he said to himself, and with his destination in mind, he disappeared. Chapter 40. Miranda stole away to the small lake near the ranger camp. She had a need to get away from everyone, be by herself to think. She couldn't have known by the forest creatures that a dreadful disease bringing so much death was just a stone's throw away. The birds were singing, and little animals scurried here and there in their playful chases. She found a remote spot on the shore where the sun reflected off the water. It created a sort of mesmerizing effect as she stared at it, the water becoming a type of mirror where she could see her reflection. She reached up with one hand and ran her fingers through her raven tresses. She paused, looking back towards the camp to make sure she was not being watched, then slipped off the ring Andor had given her, closing her eyes as she did. As she slowly opened them, she looked in the mirrored water at a face she once knew all too well. What looked back at her was a beautiful young girl with blonde hair and big violet eyes. A girl she had hidden, first with her spells, and then by the ring Andor had crafted with her help. She smiled at the image in the water, but it quickly faded as painful memories flooded her mind. She was back at the frontier coast where her parents had sold her to a wizard. The wizard had come to her town looking for an apprentice, or so he said. Her family was poor, and the gold the wizard offered would assure their survival for another 3 years. What he was wanting in reality was more than an apprentice. Oh, sure, he taught her some spells, but what she learned more than anything from him was how insignificant and pathetic she was. He taught her this every time she made the slightest mistake, every time she displeased him, which was all the time. He taught her she was nothing more than a worthless little whore every time he dragged her into his bed and relieved himself. By the time he discarded her, she was mentally and physically broken. For 2 years, she had endured his abuse. Although she was only 14 when he sold her to a slave ship headed for the hold of Maladron, his face with a scar across his cheek would forever be etched in her memory. He had boasted about the scar, saying that he had gotten it while facing a troll in his youth. A troll had given him the scar, this she had no doubt, but the nightmares he had while he slept beside her told a different story about the how. As she came out of her trance, she slapped the water, disgusted with the image it displayed. As the ripples distorted the mirror-like effect, she slipped the ring back on. When the water was again calm, it reflected back the person she chose to be. For others to see, the girl she created in Mazaron and fooled herself into believing she had been ever since. She fooled the owner of the bar she worked at, fooled the barbarian and the dwarves, fooled the priest, the knight, and all the others. She even fooled Xavier. She was no longer the miserable little girl Xavier met so long ago. She was Miranda the Sorceress, Shadowcat. After the Day of the Dragons, she was even called the Scarlet Witch. Ha! She rather liked that. She guessed the term scarlet was for the amount of flames the dragons created. Ah, that wonderful orb. After that fateful day, she fashioned a staff and had the orb affixed to the top. She can feel the power of the orb. She knows it has other powers, but what those are she cannot discern. Her thoughts were disrupted when an object struck the water she had been observing. "A copper for your thoughts," a voice said as the ripples of the coin displacing the water began to slow. She turned her head to see Eric standing over her, his muscular frame silhouetted by the sun. She had known for a long time now his feelings for her. What did he see in her? The same as any other man. No, Eric was different. He was, well, good. No, perfect. Too perfect. He deserved better than her. She was defiled, unclean. She had known too many men. Most had forced themselves on her. A few she gave herself willingly. She was such a fool. She was nothing more than a plaything to them. She would have continued her internal rant, leaving Eric to stand there, his question unanswered, had it not been for a second voice. It broke her out of her self-induced trance, allowing her to hear the commotion coming from the camp. "Miranda! Eric!" Andor called. "You've got to come meet him." "Meet who?" Eric asked. "El Sandorol, the blue elf." Chapter 41. The village was all abuzz at their blue-skinned visitor. While he was all but unknown outside of the Vressels, El Sandorol was famous and renowned to those who dwelled within its fringes. He was known to most, which had the privilege of seeing him, as the Blue Elf, primarily due to his color and to the elven features he possessed. He was lithe despite his size. He was over 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds, and had pointed ears like an elf. He had a celestial quality which drew children to him wherever he went. He spoke in sonorous tones, which enhanced the otherworldly nature, yet was unfailingly polite and courteous, which put even the adults at ease. After he said his hellos and ushered off the little ones, he made his way to Andor and the rest of the protectors. "I am told you found the cup and talisman," he said, addressing the entire group. "Now the people have hope again. Many thanks." With that he bowed slowly, as is custom among the Hurrians to the west. Before anyone could respond, he continued, "That is not why I'm here, however. It has come to my attention that a cabal of priests of the Reaper has been seen around a ruined Hurrian castle northeast of here. They are searching for an artifact." "A staff?" Marikai interrupted. Yes, Alessandro said, with one eyebrow raised to anyone else having had this information. With a rust-colored skull topping it off? Said Hawkeye. Yes, Alessandro replied, now anxious to hear what else this group had to say. And 2 emeralds for eyes? Andor finished. You've seen this staff? Alessandro asked, hoping it was recovered. Yes, Eric replied. We heard about it from a friend of ours. We actually ran into the servants of the Reaper who had all but the emeralds. We gave it to them good, Hawkeye interrupted, but they won't be forgetting us for a while. What are the staff? Alessandro said, with a tinge of impatience in his voice, which was highly uncharacteristic of him. Still in their possession, Andor said flatly, the weight of their failure to recover the artifact finally hitting him. Then the emeralds are what they are looking for near the castle, Alessandro concluded. They must be stopped from completely assembling the artifact. Then why not just send a force of elves to go get it? Hawkeye asked. The castle lies in the heart of the forest that is controlled by goblins, and which is near the area overrun by Icarus forces. Too many elvish lives would be lost. Plus, it's our task to complete, Andor added. Alessandro looked at Andor and gave a head bow, acknowledging Andor's ownership of the situation. Looking at Eric for a sign of agreement and getting it, Andor declared, We will finish what we started. We will find the priests and retrieve the artifact. Be on your guard, Alessandro warned. The castle dungeons are said to run deep. Long ago, the castle was destroyed from within. There were no survivors, so what exactly happened is a mystery to this day. What you might find down there may be beyond your ability to overcome. May the Lord of Light be with you. With this, Alessandro took his leave. Once the protectors were alone, Hawkeye said, Did anyone else just hear elvish lives are more important than yours? And you're all probably going to die, but good hunting. Good old Hawkeye. Chapter 42. The citadel of Kirkuk was once a bustling place of commerce in the vast forest. Built by the migrating Hurrians centuries ago, the castle proper was made of stone, with the temple of Shashka being of marble with a dome of brass. Over time, the forest has attempted to reclaim what was destroyed in the citadel's building. Overgrown with vines, it's as if the very earth itself was reaching upward with fingers to grab the citadel and drag it to the depths below. The area around the citadel was usually shunned by all with any semblance of intelligence. However, as Andor's group drew close, a clattering of noise could be heard. As they drew even closer, the sounds of battle could be discerned, as clashes of blades and strange sounds, which could only be offensive spells by the hearing, filled the air around them. When the group was in eyeshot, a most strange sight was playing out before them. A fairly large battle of goblins, some of which were on giant wolves, undead, large orcs, and almost a dozen priests, which by the look of it worshipped at least 2 evil deities, was taking place. As Andor's group watched on, they were able to make out the alliances in the battle, which were 3. 2 of the priests wore black robes. One was surrounded by a group of zombies, forming a ring of protection around him. He pointed a finger at one of the goblins astride a wolf, and a bolt of black, crackling energy shot forth, striking the goblin in the chest. It fell off the wolf and hit the forest ground with a thud. The second wielded a black wand and seemed to be commanding the group of large orcs who were fighting a like number of wights, fending off their maniacal claw attacks with swords. The other 7 priests wore rust-colored robes and wielded sickles, identifying them as followers of the Reaper. The apparent leader bore a huge sickle requiring both hands to wield. He seemed content to let his underlings do battle, some using staffs or sickles, others throwing nets at onrushing goblins and trapping them in the mesh. He nonchalantly walked up to a trapped or wounded foe and ended their pitiful existence with his razor-sharp blade. The black-robed priest wielding the wand pointed it at a group of the Reaper's priests and uttered the command word. Bone fragments shot forth in a cone-shaped hail of death, felling one and wounding the others as the fragments pierced their flesh like dozens of sharp knives. One of the staff-wielding priests of the Reaper caused a swarm of insects to usher forth from his staff and engulf the largest of the wolf-riding goblins. The surprised goblin tried to fight off the biting and stinging creatures, but succumbed to the many tiny poisonous wounds that they inflicted upon him. In a matter of seconds, he was laying on the ground dead. Upon seeing their leader fall, the rest of the goblin band took flight, no longer having the stomach for a fight. Marakai grabbed Andor by the arm and motioned with a nod at the leader of the Reaper's priests. Looking closely at him, Andor saw what Marakai had seen: the skull staff of death secured to the leader's waist by a belt. It still did not contain the emerald eyes. Andor had the group gathered together in a cluster, in hand's reach of each other. Miranda and Andor began casting spells. When they were done, the entire group was rendered invisible and silent. Remembering the fight they had with the priests of the Reaper before, Andor did not think it wise to wage battle with not only those priests, but 2 of Icarus' priests and over a score of undead. No, they would instead stealthily enter the castle, letting the 2 forces do battle with each other while they continued on in their quest of the emeralds. With any luck, the 2 groups of priests would destroy each other, and their finding the emeralds would be moot. Andor's Journal. God's Day 32, 12:30. The dungeons below Kirkuk seemed to go down for miles. We've encountered many creatures none of us have ever seen before. Some don't even seem to be of this world. It's been 3 days since we've entered this strange place, and we have yet to find any trace of the emeralds. Chapter 43. I'm surprised we haven't encountered any dark elves down here, Marakai pondered out loud. When we encountered Tentacle Puss, he continued, I was certain we were back in the Underdark. I suppose we could be, Andor replied, but it far from resembles what we traversed before. Indeed, the caverns and passages the group had traveled up to this point bore no resemblance whatsoever to the underworld. None of the phosphorescent lichen or any of the glowing beetles that allowed for lighting, however dim it might have been, was present here. The group had to make do with light spells and torches. Neither were the creatures native to the underworld encountered here: dark elves, fishmen, dark gnomes, etc. What do you think your new armor does? Miranda asked Andor. I'm not sure, he replied. When I used my gem, I saw runes etched in it, in the form of a spider with a human-like head. Do you think it was a gift to old, Hawkeye said, then paused, placing his wrist to his chin and wiggling his fingers, by the Spider Queen? I doubt it, Andor answered. The creature also had the sun blade that was engraved with the symbol of the Lord of Light. Perhaps the rune has the key to its function, Xavier said. May I see your gem for a moment, Andor? Andor handed his prized gem to Xavier, who peered through its facets at the breastplate Andor now wore. Ah, yes, Xavier said out loud, but in low, whispered tones. I remember this creature. We fought 2 of these in the underworld on our way to the Dark Elf City. They appeared out of nowhere, attacked, and then disappeared again. When we returned home, I researched them. It seems that rather than having the power of blinking, which I at first thought them to have, they actually phase in and out at will. Phase? Eric asked. Materialize, Xavier clarified. He would have elaborated more had not the sounds of battle in the distance put the group on alert. They quickly doused their light sources and cautiously advanced towards the glow of torchlight and the occasional scream. The passage opened up into a small cavern. In the center was a mound of treasure, or at least at first sight that's what it appeared to be. Oh, there were several thousand coins, but they lay covering and sliding down a globular creature with several tentacles lashing out from it. It was battling none other than the priests of the Reaper. The ground around the monster was littered by the priest's undead minions. The monster had one of the wights grasped in a tentacle and using it as a bludgeoning weapon against its fellow wights. One tentacle wielded a polearm and was using it to keep one of the priests at bay, while a third tentacle used a sword to block another priest's sickle. As their blades clashed against each other, the priest's head was engulfed by a jaw with razor-sharp teeth at the end of one of the tentacles. As Andor was watching this battle unfold, his eyes diverted to the treasure. From the torchlight he could faintly see the sparkle of 2 emeralds. As he looked again on the battle, the priests were gaining the upper hand. Although all the undead and 3 priests lay dead around the beast, the amount of damage it had taken from the sickles was too much. In a mass of writhing tentacles it collapsed, its blood forming a pool around it until finally it lay still. Knowing the final two priests were close to obtaining their prize, Andor rushed towards them while grasping his talisman and invoking the words that would open a flaming crack in the earth beneath their feet and send them to the bowels below. The priests turned as one towards this new threat, and an evil smile curled the lips of the high priest. Andor halted some 20 paces from his intended victims. Something was amiss. The ground below them did not open. How could this be? As he was pondering the talisman's failure, the high priest spoke but two words. "Kill him!" His junior priest charged Andor, sickle raised high and screaming at the top of his lungs as he ran. It was at that moment the rest of the group decided to make their presence known. Swords in hand, Eric, Marikai, and Jovan charged. Hawkeye took one step into the cavern and took aim at the priest, charging Andor. Xavier stepped to the side and prepared a spell. Miranda was not to be seen. The high priest immediately recognized Marikai. He took his great sickle and slashed it through the empty air, saying, "Blades of death!" A wall of whirring, razor-sharp blades sprung into being right in front of the onrushing warriors. They had little chance of avoiding its sudden appearance and crashed head-on into it. Hawkeye's arrows, loosed just prior to the spell being cast, were turned into splinters when they contacted the wall of blades. Xavier, taken aback by the change of events, paused in his casting long enough for the high priest to act again. This time he pointed the skull staff at the cavern entrance and intoned a command word. Amidst Xavier and Hawkeye appeared a large lump of blackness, out of which 4 wispy black tentacles appeared at the 4 compass points of the lump. 2 of the tentacles lashed out at Xavier and Hawkeye, attempting to entwine them. Hawkeye was immediately grasped, and the tentacle began pulling him toward the black lump of darkness. Xavier managed to fend off the tentacle attacking him with his staff for the moment. As the trio of warriors lay on the ground, cut up and bleeding, the high priest threw a magical net over them. It closed fast around them, pinning them to the ground. Andor blocked the maniacal priest's sickle with his mace, and then countered with the same. While the two were locked in combat, the high priest walked over to where Andor saw the emeralds and reached down. Just then, at the other end of the cavern, a loud sound occurred. The high priest stopped mid-stoop and looked in that direction, as the entire passage at that end began to glow a bright red color. The noise, which sounded as though something large were approaching, grew closer, and the glow grew in intensity. The air in the cavern began to get hotter. The glow turned into flames that flowed as though they surrounded something that was moving. The high priest wasted no time. He snatched up the emeralds and called to his junior priest, who broke off his attack on Andor. As they made their way toward the exit, the high priest looked over his shoulder to see a fire demon enter the cavern, whip in one hand and a giant sword in the other. It was surrounded by flames, which moved as if they were a part of it. As the 2 priests passed by the trapped warriors, the high priest pulled a dagger from his robe, retrieved his magical net, and plunged the dagger into Marikai's chest. "Remember this?" the high priest said as he looked Marikai in the eyes. He slowly pulled Marikai's dagger back out, relishing the pain he inflicted with every centimeter the blade traveled through Marikai's body, as though it were nourishment to his own. He then sheathed the bloody blade, and the 2 priests made haste their escape, leaving their much weakened foe behind to face the demon. As Eric and Jovan slowly stood and prepared to meet this terror from the abyss, Andor rushed to Marikai's side. Hawkeye had managed to break free of the tentacle before it drew him into the black mass, and joined Eric and Jovan. Xavier, using his staff, levitated out of the reach of the groping tentacles. As the fire demon got closer and the temperature became almost unbearable, a most bizarre thing occurred. The fire demon simply disappeared. As Eric and the others prepared for a sudden reappearance, a familiar voice behind them said, "Relax, it's not real." And that, my friends, is where we are going to end for tonight. I hope you enjoyed this episode of my Book of Prophecies. Join me back again next week when I continue the saga and find out what exactly just happened. So, please do, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button notification bell so that you can be notified of any of these videos that I post, and the like button. Share it to all your friends so that they can enjoy this site as well. And oh, and leave comments in the comment section because I do love those, and I will get back to those and answer them as quickly as possible. And I guess that's about it for tonight. So see you next time, and as always, see you soon.